Simon? Okay, good.
Dr. Lee.
So, okay, good. So a very good morning to our colleagues in Switzerland and a very good afternoon to colleagues here in Thailand. My name is Lily Ervilaitit and I'm Vice President of International Collaboration at Thailand's National Science and Technology Development Agency, or NASDA. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event on Swiss research funding and cooperation opportunities for researchers in Thailand, which we've organized in cooperation with ETH Zurich, the Swiss National Science Foundation, and the Swiss Embassy in Thailand. So we are most honored to have with us today Mr. Konradin Vasi, who is Deputy Head of Mission at the Swiss Embassy, and I would like to invite Mr. Razi to give some welcome remarks. So please, Mr. Razi.
Thank you very much for the invitation today, and apologies for my slight delay. I had an issue with accessing to the webinar. I don't know why, but I'm now at the computer of my colleague Kun Pat, who will also stay throughout the seminar with you. I have to leave in 10 minutes for another appointment, but yes, I would like to say hello to everyone. Good afternoon in Bangkok, good morning in Switzerland. My name is Konradin and I'm the Deputy Head of the mission here, the Swiss Mission, Swiss Embassy in Thailand. I'm very pleased to be able to participate in the beginning of this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank the Thailand National Science and Technology Development Agency for hosting and organizing today's virtual exchange. It's really a great pleasure for us at the embassy that we see this kind of event taking place between, this close exchange between Thai and Swiss professionals. And I also want to thank today's panelists from Switzerland, Dr. Stefanie Hoppler, Dr. Matt Kimmich, Ms. Patricia Heuberger, for their time and dedication to talk today on Swiss research funding and cooperation opportunities for researchers in Thailand. I don't want to take much time because I would like to leave as much room as possible for the subsequent exchange between you all. And I'm certain that the exchange will lead to further deepening the collaboration between Thailand and Switzerland in the field of research, science, education, and innovation. Let me just say a few words on where we stand in the bilateral relations between Thailand and Switzerland very generally. Last year, Thailand and Switzerland celebrated 90 years of diplomatic relations, and it's fair to say that we have very broad, diverse bilateral relations in various fields, including in the field of science, education, research, and innovation. And that's why it's a special pleasure that we have this webinar today. It's very timely and very important. There are already numerous direct contacts between higher education institutions, research institutions, and individual researchers in Thailand and Switzerland. And such contacts, as you know, are the best guarantee for high quality cooperation on equal terms. Switzerland favors, very generally speaking, a bottom-up approach in terms of how cooperation should take place. So actively establish between universities and educational institutions themselves. So not some kind of bottom-down approach dictated by the government or by embassies, but really this bottom-up approach is exactly what we actually like to see. And we believe that the direct collaboration between funding agencies is the best way to establish solid and sustainable collaboration mechanisms. The Swiss State Secretariat for Science, Education, Research and Innovation mandated the ETH Zurich as the leading house to launch instruments to support research and innovation collaboration with Southeast Asian countries for the period 2021 to 2024. And based on principles of mutual interest, joint funding and scientific excellence, such programs are designed to facilitate long-term and sustainable partnerships. Calls for projects are regularly launched by the leading house, which is, as I said, ETH Zurich, and are open to Swiss researchers, academic institutions, and startups to collaborate with Thai colleagues. Ms. Heuberger will certainly say more about that collaboration in a minute. Furthermore, the leading house and the Swiss Thai Chamber of Commerce have recently signed an MOU in order to allow students from Swiss universities and institutions to do an internship in a company in Thailand and we're very much looking forward. We actually expect the first interns to come already into Thailand in a few months' time. And finally, I would also like to seize this opportunity to remind everyone that Switzerland awards government excellence scholarships to promote international exchange and research cooperation between Switzerland and over 180 countries. These scholarships are aimed at young researchers from abroad who have completed a master's degree or a PhD, and at foreign artists researchers holding a bachelor's degree. Thailand has since 1962 received about 100 scholarships so far. So with that, let me hand the floor back to you, Lily, and to today's other panelists. I wish you all a very fruitful and interesting discussion and exchange. And thank you very much again for having us to open up this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Razi, for your remarks and for your support. And I would also like to express my sincere appreciation to all of today's presenters for devoting their time to this event. And I look forward to hearing about all the exciting project ideas that arise from today's information session. Now, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Simon Grimley, advisor to NASDAQ International Collaboration Office, who will moderate this afternoon meeting. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lily. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We have an excellent program lined up for you this afternoon with four terrific presenters who are spending their time with us for the next hour and a half. So I want to encourage all of you to please take full advantage of this session by asking lots and lots of questions, and we will do our best to answer those as we move through the program, and there'll be time also at the end for some discussion. Just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. I want to let you know that we will be sharing the recording of the webinar today, as well as all of the presentations with you. You will all receive that by tomorrow morning at the latest. So don't worry about if you don't get everything off the slides. We'll be sharing that information with you by tomorrow latest. So let's get started. As I say, we've got four presentations today. We will first hear about the Swiss Spirit program, which offers funding for research consortia, and presenting that program is Dr. Stephanie Hoppler, who is a scientific officer in charge of this program. So Stephanie, it's over to you to tell us more about the Spirit program.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having us. Can you hear me well?
Can hear you very well.
Okay, very good. I will start with a very, very brief introduction of the Swiss National Science Foundation, and then go on to present Spirit in a bit more detail. So the next slide, please. I think my slides have disappeared. Is that correct?
Stephanie, just bear with us. We're just getting your slides
not
up there
a problem
now.
at all. Yep, that's fine. Great, thank you. So the SNSF receives their legal mandate from the Federal Act of Promotion of Research, and there it is postulated that the SNSF is the Confederation's funding body for research in all academic disciplines. With this mandate, we are encouraged to support the freedom of research, scientific quality, the diversity of scientific opinions and methods. It's also important that scientific integrity is adhered to and good scientific practice. We also encourage research which does not directly serve commercial purposes, and we put a particular emphasis on the promotion of basic research. That is very important. We also promote the career development of promising young researchers. There are various funding instruments for that. And it is important that we undertake everything to provide equal opportunities and true gender equality between women and men. Next slide, please. Thank you. Therefore, on that basis, our strategic priorities are shown here. We depart from the assumption that research and environment change and continue to develop, and that it is important that we stay on track, that we consider these changes, that we help to shape them by promoting the diversity of research, by shaping the future of research, by communicating the value of the research that is done, and that we also strengthen the competence of the Swiss National Science Foundation. Next slide, please. Now, the division that I and Matt are in is the Division for International Cooperation, and the International Cooperation Strategy is outlined here. So our main objectives are the facilitation and optimization of global scientific collaboration and exchange. We try to foster cross-border cooperation to the benefit of Swiss research, but also to contribute to the increase of research capacity in Switzerland, but also abroad. And the basic principles for that are scientific excellence. That's how we evaluate research, the free choice of topics and disciplines, the interdisciplinary collaboration and scientific autonomy is important. We adhere to high ethical standards and request that from our researchers. We aim for simpler structures and multilateral approaches to reduce administrative burden, and we aim for freely accessible data. This is the SNSF and the international cooperation in a nutshell. SPIRIT, the Swiss program for international research by scientific investigation teams, is part of that division, and I will go into a bit of detail now to show how SPIRIT may be of interest to you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So SPIRIT offers collaborative projects for researchers in Switzerland with researchers in partner countries. So there is the need for at least one researcher in Switzerland and a researcher in a specific partner country. There are no thematic restrictions. The project duration is between 2 and 4 years. The annual submission deadline is the 2nd November. Next slide, please. With SPIRIT, we aim again, and you recognize this from the international collaboration strategy, to foster cross-border collaboration without any disciplinary restrictions, and to thus provide more opportunities for researchers in Switzerland to collaborate with various partners around the world. We aim to promote gender awareness and equal opportunities. This is very important for SPIRIT, and we try to contribute to the increase of research capacity, not only in Switzerland, but also abroad. Next slide, please. For SPIRIT projects, you can ask between 2 and 4 years as regards duration. The maximum amount is 500,000 Swiss francs. The minimum amount is 50,000. There is a rule regarding the budget that says that at least 30% of the budget needs to remain in the partner country or the partner countries if there are several, and the equal amount has to stay in Switzerland. The remaining 40% can be distributed as the project requires. The eligible costs are the same as in the main funding instruments of the SNSF, the project funding scheme. That means that staff salaries are covered, although the grantee salaries are not. This is important. The material costs that are directly linked to research are covered, any use of research infrastructure, and we also cover conferences, workshops, cooperation, etc., networking activities that are in direct relation to the research, but also in direct relation to gender awareness raising strategies. Next slide, please. The research teams consist of 2 to 4 applicants. This means that the minimum team has to consist of 1 applicant in Switzerland and 1 applicant in a partner country. If you wish, you can then add further researchers either in Switzerland or in the same partner country where the second applicant comes from, or any other eligible partner country. So you can have one researcher in Switzerland, one in Thailand, one in Botswana, and one in Chile, for instance, or you can have 3 in Switzerland and 1 in Thailand. Everything is possible as long as the budget is adhered to and as long as the researchers come from the eligible partner countries. Next slide, please. The partner countries are based on a selection that departs from the development assistance committees of the OECD's list. The exceptions that we installed are the member states of the European Union, all countries that are associated to the EU's framework programs, as well as countries that are currently collaborating on a bilateral call with the SNSF. Currently, Iran is also excluded because it is not possible to wire funds to Iran due to international sanctions. The complete list of countries that are eligible and also those countries that are excluded can be found on the Spirit website. Next slide, please. Here are the basic eligibility requirements. I already mentioned the project funding scheme of the SNSF, and the eligibility requirements are the same. And it is also important to point out that only 1 Spirit grant per person and period is allowed for all applicants in Switzerland and abroad. Next slide, please. The evaluation criteria also resemble those of project funding, but they are a bit more encompassing. So scientific relevance, originality of aims and objectives, as well as suitability of methodology and the feasibility of the planned project are important. We also consider the track record and the expertise of the researchers, but also their complementarity. So if the teams do the exact same thing, complementarity will be assessed lower as when they really have a complementary relationship. A pre-existing partnership is not necessary. We also consider how the planned project contributes to the increasing of scientific capacities in the relevant research field in Switzerland and abroad, and also how the project with regard to team and research content contributes to the raising of gender awareness and to the promotion of equal opportunities. That doesn't mean that you absolutely have to include a gender component, or you have to include a balanced research team, but you have to think about whether that makes sense for your research or for your team, and then show which efforts you have undertaken to arrive at an equal team and at this decision then to include a gender perspective or to not include it. In the end, once the evaluation is finished, we look at the proposals, and if there are proposals that have been found to be equal in terms of their scientific quality, we will choose that, we will prioritize that application that has more female applicants or the project that shows a better gender awareness. Next slide, please. The evaluation is starts with the annual submission deadline of the proposals on 2nd of November. It is then followed by an international peer review, and the applications are evaluated by the Spirit Evaluation Commission, which consists of about 40 researchers from all over the world. We have 2 gender equality experts who are part of the SEC, and minimum 40% of the SEC are female, while at least 40% are male. Next slide, please. Now, if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them, but you can also then send me an email to spirit@snf.ch, or you can visit our website, which is in the process of being updated, but generally you should be able to find all the documents that I have referred to now also on the website. So with that, I close my presentation. Thank you so much for presenting my slides.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that very concise presentation, very clear. I just wanted to, just for those listening, the funding for this program, I did a quick conversion. So I think it's 50,000 to 500,000 Swiss francs. Is that correct, Stephanie?
Yes, that's
so
right.
That converts to 2 million Thai baht up to 18 million Thai baht. So that's the kind of funding that you'll be looking at. I have a couple of questions. One is, and this actually was received, we've already received this from a researcher, about the 30% rule.
Mm-hmm.
The question was, so if you've got a 4-year project, do you have to spend 30% per year, or can it be
No.
Total for the project? Okay.
No, it's the total. Absolutely. We realize that sometimes in international collaborations, it's important for one team to start with the research, and then the focus of the budget will be in Switzerland, for instance, and then in the second and third year, it will be in Thailand. So really, it's at the end of the year. This implies that researchers have to keep track of their budget to make sure that at the end of the project, there is not an imbalance towards one country or the other.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, because that's exactly what they were proposing, that the first 2 years of work would be done probably mostly in Thailand, and then the remainder of the work in Switzerland. So that's why the question came up. In terms of eligible countries, so Thailand is eligible, and am I correct in saying that for the rest of Southeast Asia, would every country in Southeast Asia other than Switzerland other than Singapore be eligible?
Pretty much, yes. Pretty much. But please consult the list of partner countries that is uploaded on our website. It's currently about 125 countries worldwide. But yes, I think we can say it like that. But we are very happy to answer your specific questions regarding the countries if you are unsure.
Okay. And there's a question we often get: what is the success rate of the program?
It's difficult to say because we have only just changed the evaluation procedure, but I can tell you that we have an annual budget of 6 million Swiss francs. And if every project asks for the maximum amount, we can fund 12 projects per year.
Okay.
So more or less, I think we could say we have about a success rate of approximately 20%.
Okay, good. Another question. So the call will open in November, I think you said, November this year?
It will close in November. It will open yes, it will open in August and then run for 3 months, and it will close on the 2nd of November at 5:00 p.m. Swiss time. So this is a deadline that is non-negotiable. You can submit any time before that, but the 2nd of November at 5 Central European time is fixed.
Okay, so opening in August, closing in November.
Exactly.
Okay. Another question here, I think you covered this, but are there specific themes? And I think you made the point that it's very much a bottom-up program. All disciplines can be funded. Could you just elaborate on that, please, once again?
Of course. No, absolutely. You are free to submit any sort of discipline, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary projects are also very welcome. It's important that the expertise is there. That's what we look at. It's important that the project is feasible, that the people who are part of the project, that they are the experts in their fields. Applied projects are also possible, but we would simply look at the research as well. So it cannot be a project that simply aims for the development of let's say sometimes we have applications to develop a certain
product or something.
Exactly, or an app, and that is not the goal. The goal is really to do the basic research behind it.
Okay. A couple of other questions here. I think this is on the meaning of gender equality. So the question here is, does that just mean a balance within the project itself, or are there other dimensions that you look at in terms of gender equality?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's very important. At the SNSF, we really find that very important, and also internationally, we see that the ERC, the Irish Science Foundation, this is becoming more and more important. While we realize that this is really the way to go, we also don't want to impose a gender perspective on projects where it doesn't make sense. That's why the idea is for researchers to show gender awareness. So let's say you have a project that examines pavements, and then you need to think about, is the research that I plan, is it in any way relevant to gender and sex? So does it depend on how women and men how they interact with this pavement? If you come to the conclusion that it's not important for your research, then you show us that in your research plan, and then that's fine with us. We don't need a gender perspective if it really doesn't make sense for your project. However, if you don't think about this and if you don't show this in your research plan, and even if it doesn't make sense, then that's a problem, and that evaluation criterion will be assessed negatively because you have not shown the awareness. So this is for the level of research content. As regards the project team, it's mostly the same mechanism. So say you are two men who want to submit an application, and you simply assume that you two are the best to do this, and that you don't consider any sort of specific hiring strategy to focus on hiring female researchers or how to best support your female postdocs and doctoral students, especially if it's a male-dominated research field, then we consider that not a very good mark with regard to your gender awareness on the level of the project team. You don't have to include women. There are disciplines where the percentage of female researchers is very low, and if you happen to be in that specific research field and the one person who would be best for your research to be best included is gone, is on maternity leave, maybe she is very busy and she cannot take other assignments, but then we want to see how you have thought about this and how you have gone through the effort of actually finding suitable women to include in your research team.
Okay.
So if you do this and you show us that you have really tried, plausibly tried and failed, then that will be acceptable. If you simply present us 4 researchers, male researchers, without explaining why, then you will not receive a good mark in that evaluation criterion.
Thanks, Stephanie. Another question here. This is an important one. There are, a number or many foreigners, who are working in Thailand. So when you talk about say a Thai partner, is it the nationality of the researcher, or is it the institution where the institution is located?
Exactly, it's the latter.
Where the
it's the same for Switzerland. It's the same for any country. So it's not Swiss researchers; it's researchers in Switzerland. Just as if somebody sets up a spirit project between Switzerland and Thailand, it can be an Irish person in Switzerland and an American person in Thailand.
Right.
That's fine. It's the institutional affiliation that counts.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. There's another question here. I think we'll leave this one, but so later on in this afternoon session, that's just about how to find Swiss partners. But let's leave that. We spoke with Stephanie a little bit before we got started, so we'll come to that question a bit later. Maybe a final question for you, Stephanie. Just what results are you expecting from the project?
I think that the SNSF doesn't. That's a difficult question. We don't. Our aim is to fund excellent research, and in research it's also important to be able to come to the conclusion that the hypothesis that was set up didn't hold up. That's also important. That's also possible. So we want to give the utmost flexibility to our researchers. We don't hold anyone accountable if the planned goal wasn't reached, as long as everything was done in good faith, and we see that the grantees tried, and that it's not due to their neglect that the goal wasn't achieved. I mean, we have seen there in the pandemic, lots of the planned research goals weren't achieved, and that is just how it works.
Sure. Okay, I think in the interest of time, let's move to the next presentation. But thank you, Stephanie, again. And you'll be with us for the rest of the afternoon, so hopefully we can come back to you if need be. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Stephanie's colleague, Dr. Matt Kimmich, who is also from the Swiss National Science Foundation, and he will be talking about the Scientific Exchanges Program. So, Matt, Dr. Kimmich, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As you said, I will be talking briefly about the Scientific Exchanges, which is the funding scheme that I'm responsible for. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'll just give you a quick idea of what the Scientific Exchanges are. The Scientific Exchanges are basically a combination of certain former funding schemes, which is also why at a first glance, it might seem a bit strange because it combines different kinds of activities. But I'm going to be focusing on the activities that are most relevant to this audience here. So the Scientific Exchanges funding scheme combines the support of scientific events such as conferences or workshops of 1 to 5 days, and of research visits by a Swiss researcher to a partner abroad, or by a researcher from abroad to a Swiss partner. The research visits, which I think are of most interest in this context, can be from 1 to 6 months in length. The Scientific Exchanges are open to collaboration with all countries and all disciplines. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I said, I'm going to focus on the research visits here because the scientific events, these are only eligible if they take place in Switzerland. Therefore, I don't think they would be all that relevant to the audience here. But the research visits, these I think would be very relevant here in this context. These must be dedicated to a complete collaborative research project. Now, when I say research project, obviously when we talk about 1 to 6 months, these are going to be smaller than, say, the Spirit projects that Stephanie talked about. But they still have to be a project with a beginning, with an end, with certain aims and outcomes in mind. So the research visit can be, for instance, a project of a larger collaboration. That is possible. For a Scientific Exchanges research visit, both partners must derive a benefit from the exchange. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, basically, we don't want the research visit where one person goes, for instance, abroad and just works in an archive, works with sources, works with materials, and barely sees the host. We really want the host and the guest to collaborate. So the benefit can also not just be one of knowledge transfer. It cannot just be that a scientific exchange research visit is dedicated to, let's say, an established researcher transferring knowledge to a relatively young postdoc. So purely educational exchanges are not supported. Again, we don't see that as a complete collaborative research project. It's also important that the qualifications and expertise of the partners is a good fit for the proposed research. Now, what's important to say here, and I'm going to say a bit more about that later on again, is this is not a competitive funding scheme in the sense that Spirit is. There is no competitive evaluation. We do not, look at, okay, which are the best 20% and the rest is rejected, but there still has to be that good fit of the partners and the research topic. Just in terms of eligibility criteria, both researchers have to have a PhD or equivalent. When I say equivalent, I basically mean that they have to have been active as researchers, employed as researchers for at least 3 years. And we've got that equivalent thing in here because in certain disciplines, it's not necessarily typical that people do a PhD, but these are relatively few disciplines. So someone who's just been working on a PhD for the last 3 years is not eligible. It's also not possible to have a scientific overlap between a proposed scientific exchange and other SNSF funded research. So the scientific exchanges have to be their own thing. They cannot just be, in a way, a top up to existing SNSF funding. The eligible costs that we include in the scientific exchanges are travel costs to or from Switzerland, basically one round trip, either for the Swiss researcher to go abroad and come back, or for the partner abroad to come to Switzerland and go back. And also, you can basically request cost of living amounting to 3,000 francs per month. Salaries are not included, research costs aren't included, and as I said, that salaries are not included. It is actually a requirement that for this research visit, both partners are employed at their home institutions. So, for instance, someone from Switzerland who goes if someone from Switzerland goes to Thailand for 6 months, they still have to have employment at their home institution for at least 20%. Okay, thank you very much. Next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of how to apply for a scientific exchange and what happens afterwards, this slide will give you the relevant information on that. What's very important is that it always is the Swiss researcher who is the applicant, whether it's the Swiss researcher going abroad or whether it's a Swiss researcher hosting someone from abroad for a research visit. Applications for a scientific exchange can be submitted at any time. That means there is no deadline. There are no dates by which applications have to come in. But an application for a scientific exchange has to be submitted between 4 and 18 months before the start of the scientific exchange. The main documentation that has to be submitted with an application consists of a short research plan, up to 5 pages, excluding references, CVs for both partners, and a letter of invitation. Applications for the scientific exchanges are evaluated in-house at the SNSF, so it's me and my colleagues who evaluate these, and applicants are usually informed of the funding decision within 2 to 3 months of the submission date. The success rates for the scientific exchanges are generally high. The reasons for rejection are usually things like, for instance, that there's a lack of mutual benefit, or that there's no clearly defined collaborative research project. The task that we have with the scientific exchanges, as I said before, is not to do a competitive peer-reviewed evaluation. This also means that the scientific exchanges are quite open to early career researchers once they've got their PhD. And the SNSF can give some further support, like for instance, we can support the visa process with a confirmation letter, but it is always the partners and the involved institutions that are responsible for organizing the visit itself and for obtaining all the required permissions. Okay, thank you very much. And that's basically it. That's a quick summary of what the scientific exchanges are and how they might, for instance, be used for collaboration between Switzerland and Thailand. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Matt. That was very, very clear. My sense is this would be a very useful program for many Thai researchers. One clarification. So, I think this is really the first bullet in the first slide. You said that the visit must be dedicated to a complete collaborative research project or something to that effect. So my question is, how well developed does that project have to be? And I guess, in other words, if you say, look, you've identified a Thai researcher has identified a colleague in Switzerland they would like to work with, and they've got a project proposal, but they've not yet spent a lot of time actually doing the joint work. The idea of the visit would be to develop the work. Is that acceptable?
I would say it's acceptable. It's just the research plan obviously has to show where this project is going. What the aims are, what the research question is. I mean, 5 pages, most researchers know that in 5 pages, there's only so much you can, of course, describe about the project. Added to which 1 to 6 months is relatively short. So I think very often the scientific exchanges are, for instance, used to address a side question of a larger research question, or they're used to start a collaboration. All of that is okay, but basically the idea behind all of this, the aims, what is supposed to come out of all of this, has to be there and defined at the very beginning. But obviously not in the same terms that a research project with a research plan of 20 pages would be.
Right, okay. And I think a key point that you made, just to remind participants, is that the application must be made by the Swiss researcher. Is that correct?
Exactly, yes, because we cannot, within the scientific exchanges, transfer money outside Switzerland, which also means that, for instance, if, let's say, a Thai researcher were to come to Switzerland for such a research visit, what would happen would be that the money would go to the host university, and they would then pay this money to the researcher as a stipend, basically.
Right. Okay. And here, there's questions just come in here. So, in terms of the age group, you know, the sort of the age group of the researcher, if I understood you correctly, it's I mean, early researchers can certainly benefit, but it's not restricted to early researchers, is it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, as I said, both the host and the guest have to have a PhD or equivalent, but after that, we've had anything from really, you know, freshly made postdocs, so to speak, up to people who are 1 year away from retirement. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And you say the success rate is generally quite high. That's I think researchers always like to hear that. And if I understand correctly, there's no deadline. It's a rolling deadline.
Exactly.
You can submit any time during the course of the year. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And basically, you're looking at travel and your sort of living costs, but no salaries, no equipment, no equipment costs. Am I correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Which again restricts what is possible, obviously, but it also kind of that in itself typifies what kind of projects are usually done.
And have you seen, you know, in the last couple of years, do you see many applications coming from Thailand and from Southeast Asia?
Not that many from Thailand. I have to admit that Thailand has not been very active in scientific exchanges. We've had a handful of people taking part in scientific events. But with the research visits, I think over 4 years, we've had about 2 or 3 applications with Thai involvement. I'm not quite sure why that is, because it is very much a funding scheme that is open to all countries. And I think we would definitely welcome more applications that are about, you know, collaborations between Switzerland and Thailand. Okay, well, there's a call to all of our participants that need to increase these application numbers, because that's just a few, you know, a couple over the last 3-4 years. That's not great. So, and a question, just again, sort of more for clarification. This would be open to any researcher with that has a research position here in Thailand. Exactly. I mean, the institution that they come from has to be a research institution, as you said. It cannot be private business. It cannot be I mean, if it's a government research institution, that would be feasible, for instance, that would be possible. But the typical case, of course, is universities. Yeah, okay. And a question here, you've addressed this already, Matt, but just a reminder for people. So if a Thai researcher is interested in this program, the first step is for them to contact their Swiss partner, develop this 5-page proposal together, you know, arrange the visit and so on, and then the Swiss partner would then submit the application to your program. Exactly, absolutely. I mean, it's a bit like, I think there was a similar question with Spirit and the SNSF in that respect. We cannot act as matchmakers, of course, but we can enable these collaborations. Right, okay. Well, this looks like a very interesting program, particularly for those researchers who are just establishing their collaboration with researchers in Switzerland. So thank you very much for that overview, and we'll probably come back to you with more questions later on in the program. So thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. And now we turn to a program called Leading House Asia. This will be presented by Patricia Heuberger from ETH Zurich, and she'll talk about what opportunities there are within the Leading House Asia program. So, Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you also for the invitation to present the Leading House Asia and its bilateral program with Asia within this program. Next slide, please. So, as you probably have realized, we are now leaving the SNSF, which is the national funding agency here in Switzerland, but this is a different funding program. It's mandated by the State Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation, SERI, which is a federal ministry, ETH Zurich, and this mandate has been given to us since 2003. It all started with a bilateral program with China, 5 years later, Japan and South Korea joined the program, and since 2013, all ASEAN member states, including Thailand, are eligible to apply for joint research funding with our program. This mandate would always be given to us for a 4-year period.
Could you just send a message out encouraging people?
Oh, sorry, Simon, you have to mute yourself, I think. Thank you. So the current mandate phase lasts from 2021 to 2024. This is a national program. Even so, ETH Zurich is a university, a technical and engineering university in Switzerland, and you see in my background slide how it looks like. Our program is a national program and as such open to all Swiss universities, universities of applied sciences and public research institutes. Similar to the SNSF program that have been presented before, it's also open to all fields of research. And the Leading House Asia, as the management unit of this program, we actually do the strategic planning, develop and the funding instruments, maintain good relationship with ministries and funding agencies in our partner countries and regions. We set the fields of priority, but we mainly manage the calls and grants. Next slide, please. So for the current funding period of the bilateral program with Asia, we have structured our different grants into 4 pillars, which I will present in the following slides. So very similar to the SNSF, and also with our program, it would always be the Switzerland-based principal investigator who needs to submit the application in collaboration with a Thai scientist. Next slide, please. The first pillar are the mobility grants. Here we fund exchanges, 3 to 6 months exchanges on the PhD and postdoc levels. However, unfortunately, we only offer such programs for China, Japan, and South Korea, but currently not for ASEAN member states, nor for Thailand. So unfortunately, I cannot offer this to you at the moment. Next slide, please. The second pillar are the so-called research grants. Within this pillar, we offer 2 instruments. The first one is called Research Partnership Grants, which is a program for joint research projects with a Switzerland-based scientist and an Asian-based scientist. This program is open to all our partner countries, including Thailand. As several times mentioned already, the principal investigator is the Switzerland-based scientist, and the grant sum is up to 25,000 Swiss francs for a project lasting up to 12 months. So this is a rather small research funding for a joint collaborative project. And I'm really happy that my colleague Isabel will later on present such a project with a Thai partner where she got the funding from our program. So you will get really an example how this could look like. We had a call last year and we'll have more calls in the coming years. However, not this year, unfortunately. But, and please next slide. We will launch the second funding instrument this summer. And this is a research partnership grant call dedicated to the ASEAN member states, including Thailand, of course. This is important because it's less competitive. Usually in the previous research partnership grants, including China, Japan, and South Korea, this scheme is very competitive since the 3 East Asian countries have very strong universities and research labs and submit many applications with Swiss scientists. So those projects in collaboration with scientists of ASEAN member states, it would always be a little bit hard to compete with the other proposal. So in this scheme, this is really dedicated to kickstart and launch new collaborations between a Switzerland-based professor, senior scientist, or postdoc, and a counterpart in Thailand, for instance. It's a smaller research grant sum, up to 15,000 Swiss francs, and the project can last up to 12 months. We will launch the call in summer 2022 towards June. Later on, I will also present to you where you can subscribe on an email list to get our calls directly when we will launch it. Next slide, please. The third pillar is the innovation grants pillar. Here we have two funding schemes that we offer, and one was mentioned in the welcome note of my colleague Conradine from the Swiss Embassy in Bangkok. These are the Asian industry internships. We do offer internship position for Switzerland-based bachelor and master students in a company or startup in Asia. And last August, ETH Zurich, with its mandate as Leading House Asia, has signed an MOU with the Swiss Thai Chamber of Commerce. And together with the Chamber, we are now establishing different partnerships with companies in Thailand, the first one to be DKSH in Bangkok. And we will have the first batch of interns in the summer break this coming summer. The first call will be launched in the next few days. So we're extremely happy that we have a good support in Thailand to offer such attractive internships and really get the Switzerland-based students first exposure in working environments in Thailand. The internship normally would last for 3 months, and the Leading House Asia covers the travel and the monthly allowances. Next slide, please. The second grant instrument within the innovation grants pillar is the so-called innovation partnership grants. These grants support collaboration between a Switzerland-based scientist and the so-called Asian innovation agent. This is kind of a technical term, and what do we mean with that? We mean the innovation agent is not a scientist, but a company, a startup, a hospital, or a government agency, for instance. So this is not a science to science collaboration, but a science to private sector collaboration. This grant is also open to all the countries we are collaborating with, and the principal investigator would be the Switzerland-based scientist. Grant sum is up to 20,000 Swiss francs, and the project duration lasts for 12 months. We will launch a call for innovation partnership grants within the next weeks, and you will get the call announcement and the notification directly from our email list if you subscribe to it. Another call will be launched next year. Next slide, please. The last pillar are the so-called opportunity grants. This is our largest funding instrument where we grant project up to 50,000 Swiss francs, again for a project duration of up to 12 months. And what's a bit special for this funding instrument, it's again a scientist-to-scientist collaboration. So the Thai scientists are eligible for this funding scheme. However, like the research projects that you will submit need to be triggered by or based on a specific event or incident in Thailand or Asia. So this could be, for instance, the Olympic Games in Tokyo, an international exhibition, but it could also be environmental incidents such as tsunamis or volcano eruptions, or even like a policy change in the partner country. So if such a big event or incident would trigger a certain research question that you would then develop together with your Swiss collaborator, then you would be eligible to submit an application for this grant scheme. And for the opportunity grants, we do also have a clear outreach and visibility component, meaning that we would require also from the project to be featured in local newspaper or to organize an event, maybe with the Swiss Embassy in Thailand or with other stakeholders, so to give also a certain visibility to this particular collaboration. As usual, the principal investigator will be the Switzerland-based scientist, and we have yearly yearly calls for this funding scheme. The next one to be launched also in summer 2022. Thank you. No, it's fine. Next slide. So we have set up a year ago for the new funding phase a new website where you will find all the details and all criteria regarding the funding schemes. And on top of it, we have the subpage grantee stories, which is really attractive, I think. You can browse through the testimonials and the stories and get a little bit a sense of how such collaborative research projects can look like. It's very attractive to see the pictures and the success stories. The second link here on this slide would lead you directly to the call distribution list, where you can subscribe and put in your contact details. So whenever we would launch a call from our side, you will directly receive the information and the link to the call web page where you would find the details of how to apply, or send the details to your Swiss counterpart and tell him or her how to apply. Thank you. So this is our small team based at ETH Zurich. This is myself. I'm in charge of the Asean member states or Southeast Asia. Then my colleague Elise Nardin is managing East Asia, mainly China, Japan, and South Korea. And Lucia Arpagaus is in charge of the finances and administrations. And the three of us are based in the International Affairs team, in the office of the president of ETH Zurich, Switzerland. Next slide. Yes, that's basically, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Lots of fantastic opportunities there for Thai researchers. I think maybe if Patricia, we spoke just before we started the session today. And maybe this is the time to discuss the question of how do you find a Swiss partner? And I certainly invite our other presenters to share their thoughts, but a number of questions have come in about this. You know, how do I go about finding a Swiss partner? Can the SNSF act as a kind of broker? Can they help partner in terms of partner searches? So perhaps I could ask you to address this question first, and then we'll go to the other presenters. So, you know, how does one go about, a young Thai researcher doesn't necessarily have collaborators in Switzerland, how do they find a partner?
Thank you, Simon. I think this is a very relevant question since it's at the beginning of any collaboration and, you know, application process, as we have heard. So this is really important. And I also would like to emphasize that neither ETH Zurich or the Leading House Asia nor the SNSF will provide matchmaking opportunities. So you really need to find your Swiss collaborator yourself. So how to do that? I think it's important to really find your counterpart who is working in a very similar field. So we have 2 federal universities, 4 federal research institutes, and 12 cantonal universities, and a lot of universities of applied sciences too. So there are a lot of institutions with different departments and faculties. So you would need to browse through those institutions and really look for a professor or a group leader who works in a very similar field. So I would say that's the hard way to get in contact with a colleague. The easier way, of course, is if you have interaction at scientific conferences or workshop, and you are like in this scientific network that you already exchange on a very similar topic, and that would be a very good opportunity to get in touch with your colleague and make them aware of the many opportunities that you have actually to apply for joint funding. And when reaching out to a professor or group leader, I really kindly ask you to be as specific as possible. So as you can imagine, our professors receive many requests from all over the world for joint collaborations. So whenever they receive very broad and general questions in the sense of, I would be very happy to collaborate with you, then they would rather just delete the message. Instead, when you present your background and tell them, I have a very specific project in mind, and this would be very complementary, you know, to have this exchange or collaborative project, and it would really support my own research path, then your success rates to get, you know, the interest of the professor or group leader is much higher. Sorry, I think you're muted. Can't hear you anymore.
My mistake. No, I think we saw Stephanie's hand up. Stephanie, did you want to add something here?
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, thank you, Patricia. I would have said pretty much the same thing. There is a further point of contact that you could consider. There is the Swiss Academy of Sciences, the SNSF, who has a commission for research partnerships with developing countries. It's spelled KFPE, and you can, by Googling that, you can actually find it. They have a database of research institutions who have done north-south research partnerships. The thing is, the database is currently under construction, so it's not accessible, but I would recommend that you, the people who are interested in collaborations can also from time to time check that database and see whether it is open again. Yes, it's important to really stress that the partner in Switzerland is needed. It's not possible for a researcher in Thailand to submit to Spirit or the scientific exchanges without a partner in Switzerland.
Thanks, Stephanie. Matt, did you any comments from you on this question of finding a Swiss partner?
Honestly, I have nothing to add because my two colleagues have already said everything. Thank you.
Good. Here's another question that's come up. There's been, in a couple of your presentations, reference to sort of scientific relevance, scientific excellence. If I've heard you all correctly, there are no specific disciplines you're focused on. You cover the hard sciences, but also humanities, social sciences. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes, it holds true for the bilateral program with Asia.
Good, okay. I'd like to suggest we adjust the program slightly. We've got a number of questions which relate to all programs, but we have a testimonial from somebody who has participated in the Leading House Asia program. Maybe we can hear from her first, and then we'll leave the remaining time open for questions for all of the programs presented today. So, Dr. Isabel Herta Eberle, if you're ready, could we invite you to share your experience with the Leading House Asia program, and then we'll come back to Q&A.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, I guess. I'm very happy to give you a little overview of what we did with the grant we received. This was within the programs that Patricia Heuberger presented before, and it was at the time called the Seed Money Grant, but I guess it's now within the Research Partnership Grants. So next slide, please. I will start with a few words about me. So I'm a food engineer from ETH Zurich. I then did my PhD in nutrition on the thematic of childhood obesity, also at ETH. And after that, I did a 3 years postdoc at the University Hospital, where I focused on a bit of a different research question relating to the effects of fructose intake on the human metabolism. And after that, I went abroad for about a year and did another postdoc at the St. John's Research Institute in Bangalore, India. I then came back to ETH and to Switzerland, and I'm now since 2012 a senior scientist at the Human Nutrition Laboratory at ETH Zurich. And here I do research and also teaching, and I'm also responsible for the coordination of our continuing education programs. My main research fields in the past years have been on childhood obesity, where I started out, but then I focused more on the double burden of obesity and micronutrient deficiencies, specifically iron, and that's also the project I'll show you. And I'm also working on iodine nutrition, mostly in Switzerland. Next slide, please. So the project that was funded by this grant was assessing the iron requirements of infants using the stable isotope dilution method. And this project was based on the problem of iron requirements in infants. Basically, adequate iron supply is crucial in early life. Nevertheless, there is still no real consensus on the actual iron requirements of young infants, and the recommendations are based on a lot of assumptions and also differ quite widely between different organizations. So the aim of our project was to directly quantify the daily iron requirements of infants aged 12 to 24 months. This project was actually a follow-up project of a larger study that was funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation, during which we worked with pregnant women who were labeled with stable iron isotopes to determine their iron absorption during pregnancy, and also if it was a project on the effect of obesity on iron absorption and iron status. So we were also very interested in the iron status of the infants. So for this follow-up project, I'm not going into too much detail with the method because it gets a bit technical, but what we were doing was that we included 12 infants of mothers who had participated in the previous study and were then included in a follow-up from 12 to 24 months of age. During this time, we collected blood samples from the infants, just very small amounts. And we were able to specifically study these children because during the pregnancy, as I mentioned, the mothers were labeled with the stable iron isotopes, and those were then also transferred to the infants. And that meant that the blood of the infants basically had a different isotopic ratio than other infants would have. And the intake of any natural iron will dilute these iron isotopes in the blood of the infants, and thereby, when we determine the change in the ratio of those isotopes, this will allow us to know how much iron was absorbed and lost by the infants. And based on that, we will hopefully be able to determine the iron requirements. We are currently still working on the project. All the samples have been collected, and the last samples are being currently analyzed, and we will still have to do complete the data analysis for all the time points. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, this was a so-called seed money grant, which now is, I guess, a research partnership grant. And it was for us a very good opportunity because it gave us the possibility to follow up those infants that were born to the mothers of our previous study up to 2 years of age. We had the advantage here that we were able to build on an existing partnership and throughout the project, and also develop further projects. We also had the possibility to invite a scientist from Maidol University to ETH Zurich, where he could learn more about stable isotope techniques. And since then, he has also been participating in furthermore projects that use this technique. So this was really a very beneficial exchange for all of us. And during the exchange, of course, also we have been able to discuss the further projects that have, in the meantime, some of them have already been carried out. I guess such a grant can also be a good opportunity to actually build a new partnership because it allows the parties to actually meet in person and discuss planned studies in detail, but also, of course, visit potential study sites or equipment that is needed and so on. So I guess even if there's no existing partnership, that can be a very good opportunity to actually build such a partnership. For us, we had the feeling that both the application and also the reporting were quite straightforward and were not burdened by any complicated administrative processes. So for us, it was a quite pleasant experience, I would say, the application and also afterwards the reporting. So I don't see any problems or hurdles there for new applications, basically. Yeah, next slide. I'm already at the end. So in case there would be any questions, here are also my contact data. And yeah, thanks for listening. And in case there are any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Thanks very much, Isabel. So you already had your contacts at Mahidol, right? Before you applied.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
For the grants. Okay. And I think you said that the grant you applied for is now going to be called, it's the Research Partnership Grant.
I think, but maybe Patricia can confirm that.
Yes, yes, it's
Patricia, if you
true.
could,
It's actually the Research Partnership Grants Asean, which will be launched. I've just got the correct data here in July, early July.
Okay. So that reason, that's the 50,000 Swiss francs, is that right?
15.
15,
exactly. 15. So it's really a smaller seed money, as Isabel mentioned, to kickstart new collaborations, to allow, such a face-to-face exchange and really develop, maybe joint proposals for larger grants than after the seed money grant, as Isabel has mentioned in her presentation.
Thai colleagues, 15,000 Swiss francs, that's approximately 500,000 Thai baht. So it's to kick off a collaboration. Okay. Maybe we can sort of open up the floor for questions directed at all the programs that were discussed today. One that has come up a few times this afternoon, I think this is mostly with regards to the SPIRIT program. So where the applicant needs to be the Swiss researcher, how does the application work in terms of the role of the Thai partner? Do they submit a separate application? Is their application included in the Swiss application? So maybe I could ask Stephanie to talk about that.
Yes, thank you. No, it's not a separate application. The applicants are required to fill or to have their joint project plan, and the entire application also includes CVs, publication lists. There, everybody who is on the core project team, that is the maximum 4 applicants, has to submit their own documents. And everything is then submitted to my SNF by the main applicant in Switzerland. So it's a joint submission, and the submission button, so to speak, has to be clicked by the researcher in Switzerland. Right. Okay. But it's fully a collaborative project to come up with the project plan.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Here's a nice question like this. This is a very optimistic question. If they apply for a research partnership grant and they're successful, can they then go on and apply for a SPIRIT grant later on? Would that be for you, Stephanie, or would that be for? Or Patricia?
I think yes. Right. I mean,
me too.
Our funding program and the SNSF program are complementary.
Yeah.
So, and this is also the idea. So we do not offer programs that the SNSF offers, right? Because this is both like federal funding channeled through different programs and streams. And, we are really, we really try to develop programs that are complementary. And in such a sense, such a, process would be very good, actually. So in the sense of what we would like to see.
Good.
I think so too. If I may add, sometimes it can be quite relevant for the evaluating bodies to see that there has been a collaboration that was successful, that has already been set up. It's not necessary, as I mentioned. It's not something that is absolutely needed. But if it can be seen that the collaboration has produced output before, then that will never be a disadvantage.
Stephanie, I think you maybe just answered my next question as well, which is from a Thai colleague. So they've already been collaborating with the Vaccine Formulation Institute in Switzerland for the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. So they've obviously, they've got a project on the go. Can they still apply to the SPIRIT program, given that they've, this project's been running for a while, or would you be looking more for new collaborations?
I'm not the last person to be able to answer that, because that's up to the Spirit Evaluation Commission to decide in the end. I mean, there are several aspects to consider. The research should still be original, so it cannot be something that has already been done. At the same time, it enhances your chances for a feasible project if you have a running collaboration, and if you have preliminary data, for instance, as well. But if you just do more of what you have already been doing, that might also be considered a bit of a problem if it's just, you know, incremental, if it just continues what you've already done. So I would recommend to come up with something new and to still show that it has arisen from something that that provides a good basis. I'm sorry if this is not very specific, but in the end, it's a bit of a balance that one has to find between setting up a new collaboration that starts from scratch and something that starts from something that has already been going on without losing originality.
Right. Okay. But I get the point. I guess one point you're making, it's not a definite no, is what you're saying. It would be, yeah. Okay. Again, for you, Stephanie, is there information about the Spirit Call available before August? And I think I know the answer, but please answer that for, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The website is up.
Yeah.
The website is running and available. All the documents are there. It's simply that the call opens the 2nd of August, meaning that this is the first time where you will be able to submit your application. I would be surprised if anybody felt compelled to submit their application in August already, with the submission deadline being in November. But no, all the information is there. But if you want to have a look at the online form of my SNF, of all the documents that are needed, because it can be a quite time-consuming process to submit an application. There's a data management plan that you have to submit, the requirements for your CVs, for your publication list, etc. They're quite concise, so you have to really follow the instructions. The project plan can be up to 20 pages, and that will take a lot of time to write. So I recommend that you get acquainted with the site as soon as you decide on the collaboration and on submitting a project. It should all be there, and then if you can't find it, let us know. But the information is online.
Good. Something that I meant to say before, after Isabel's presentation, which I think should be music to the ears of the participants today, which is that I think you said, Isabel, that the application and reporting and administrative procedures are very straightforward. So I know that's always good to hear with these sorts of programs. So please take note of that. I think this question was answered earlier. The rate of success of Spirit proposals, I think you answered that at the beginning of it's about 20%, correct? I mean, it's a global program in a sense, so yeah.
For the current call, it will likely fall somewhere between 18 and 25%. 20%. Yes. Yeah. It depends on the number of submissions. If I may, Simon, I see that there has been a question regarding age limit, and since that is an important issue for the SNSF, would you mind if I answered that question?
Please, yes.
Okay. So in Switzerland, we have the retirement age is 46 years for women, and not 46, sorry, 65 years for women, and 64 for women, 65 for men. Sorry. Now here we go. And the SNSF requires that all the researchers who submit to them are actually active researchers with a running contract of minimum 50%. That means that everybody who starts official retirement age in Switzerland during the planned running time of the project needs to provide proof that they will be employed for the entire duration of the project. This is the same for everybody who participates in the project, who is an applicant, but it is specifically relevant for people who enter retirement age. And for a lack of better options, we also apply that to all our applicants abroad. So even if other countries have different retirement age mandate or restrictions, then we also apply that to them. So if you are a researcher in Thailand who reaches their 64th or 65th year during the planned project, please make sure that you submit a confirmation by your institution that confirms that you will be employed with a minimum 50% employment rate as an active researcher at your institution. I think you're on mute, Simon. I can't hear you.
My apologies. Question for SNSF. I'm not sure why I struggle with that. Do you offer any programs, say you've been successful in getting a Spirit grant, do you offer any sort of further career development awards or anything for previous recipients? So, I mean, in a sense, like an alumni program or anything like that?
There's no alumni program, but we have various funding instruments that cover very specific points of research careers. It would be difficult to list them all here, and I'm also not the right person to do that. But I invite you to visit our website and to look at the offers that there are. Generally speaking, there are projects that you can apply to and career option support that you can apply to. Now, for researchers from abroad, there is, for instance, also the Synergia program, which offers, if there are at least 2 researchers in Switzerland in the collaboration, there may be a further applicant from any other country in the world who can participate in the collaboration. They have to be interdisciplinary, they have to be collaborative, they have to offer breakthrough research. But I invite you to look at the regulations, which are always online on the specific website for more details.
Good. Okay. This is again, I think I'll ask this just to reinforce a point that you've made earlier. So somebody's asking, is there funding that might be related, or could research into law enforcement, police work, could that be funded? And I mean, you've mentioned, all research fields. So if that was strictly speaking a research project, could that be funded, or does that fall into a, military type no-go area?
It's difficult with that little information to say yes or no, a definite yes or no. I mean, law is a discipline that we allow, that we also evaluate. But then the research also has to be safe of conflict, and the context is important. If you're unsure, I would invite the researcher who has the question to send me a bit more details on the planned research, so that I can try to give a bit more detailed feedback from what I've heard. I don't want to say no, but I'm also I'm also careful to just say yes when I mean, with military background.
Sure. Yeah. Understand.
Yeah, that is always a bit difficult.
Okay. May I come back to Patricia and the research partnership grant call? So Patricia, could you just sort of elaborate how the funding actually works between, or would work between the Thai partner and the Swiss partner?
So we from the leading house are pretty open to that. So it really depends on the project. But similar to the SNSF, we would only transfer funds to the Switzerland-based PI, but the project itself can transfer funds from the Swiss PI chair to the counterpart in Thailand. So we had project with pretty extensive, surveys on the ground, and they had to hire, consultants and employees and use the grants for that. So this is fine. However, so if the full grant will be transferred to Thailand only, this would not be eligible, but we don't have a specific ratio. So it's just the proposal, and the budget needs, to be aligned. and
Right.
the budget justification needs to mirror the activities, basically. But it is allowed to spend funds on the local grant. However, it becomes difficult regarding salary coverage. So usually we do not allow for salary payments. There is one exception. If either a scientist in the Swiss or the Thai team would develop a follow-up proposal. So in this specific case, one could hire a scientific assistant, for instance, who would, based on the preliminary results of that smaller project, develop a proposal for, let's say, an SNSF proposal, and salary costs would be covered for this case, but not to conduct the research itself.
Understand. Okay. A question here, well, there's a few questions that have, and I think this is back to Stephanie in the SPIRIT program. There are a few questions here related to equipment costs, which I think you mentioned, they could be supported. Could you elaborate, Stephanie, in terms of, the size of equipment or the cost of equipment, and also whether the program would allow the purchase of equipment in Thailand, in the lab in Thailand?
Yes, absolutely. It allows for that. Generally we have global budgets, meaning that as a grantee, you are free to dispense the budget as your project needs it, as long as you adhere to the 30% rule that I outlined.
Right.
And what we will do is, once you submit your application that includes a full budget, we will have our financial officers look at that in much detail and give you feedback if something doesn't work, or if any sort of expense that you plan cannot be covered. We will already, during the formal check at the very beginning, we will get back to you and cancel those that are not eligible or that are too high. If you ask for too high a salary, for instance, we will reduce that. And in that sense, you don't have to worry about doing things wrong. In a way, you will not be punished by non-consideration or any such strict thing, but we will reduce the budget to what is allowed. At the same time, I would still invite you to look at the details. The SPIRIT regulations outline very exactly what is possible as eligible costs, and there are also the SPIRIT guidelines for applications that are specifically constructed with the SPIRIT applicant in mind, and they follow my SNF logic. So by having the guidelines next to you when you submit your application, you can actually really adhere to what we ask, and then not be requested to change all that much during the formal check that we conduct at the beginning.
Thank you. This is a question that came up a little bit earlier, but again, for you, Stephanie. So, you talk about the 1+1 minimum, partnership in the SPIRIT program. Now, would a partnership between a Swiss researcher, a researcher working at a Thai government lab, government-supported lab, and a Thai university, would that be an eligible proposal? So, in other words, you've got two partners in Thailand from two different, institutions in a sense, plus your Swiss partner. Would that be eligible?
Yes, that's a good question. Generally, yes, it's possible to have two partners in Thailand. That is absolutely not a problem. You can even have a third, and they can be from different institutions. That is not a problem at all. Important is that the applicants, the respective applicants, that they are affiliated at institutions that we can consider eligible. What does that mean in detail? First of all, the main purpose of the institution where your researcher is affiliated at has to have research as its main purpose. So if in doubt, we will obtain the statutes of that specific institution to see whether in the statutes research is listed as the main aim, the main purpose of the institution. If that is not the case, we cannot consider it. There's a second condition. The profit orientation needs to be cannot be given. So it cannot be a private think tank that tries to, is profit oriented, so to speak. So these two conditions, they have to be fulfilled. And then a third subcondition is that the research that is conducted has to be at university level. So we will check the publications that come forth from this institution to see whether we can actually whether we have a comparable level to that of a university or a university of the applied sciences. And finally, the applicant themselves has to be an active researcher, but that applies to all of the applicants.
Okay, good. I think we're getting close to the end of our program, unfortunately. But I just maybe would ask Patricia if you have any final words for the participants today. Obviously, the calls are coming up, which is terrific news. But any final comments from you?
So yes, first of all, thank you very much for having participated in the session, and I look forward receiving, an increased number of applications with Thai collaborators. And as mentioned before, so my first recommendation would really be to subscribe on our call distribution list on the website. So you will receive all the information from the beginning, and then you would have enough time to find a suitable Switzerland-based researcher and develop a joint proposal. And the second recommendation, as mentioned before as well, really reach out to a colleague based in Switzerland with very specific suggestions and questions. And then I'm convinced that very nice proposals and projects will come in, and I will be happy, to see fruitful collaborations. Thank you so much, Simon.
Thanks, Patricia. Matt, final words from you?
Say that all the relevant things were already said by my colleagues. I think the important thing is there are funding opportunities out there. The SNSF, all the leading houses can support you, but it is important for Thai researchers to make connections, to reach out to colleagues, and as Patricia especially has said, to reach out in as specific a way as possible. If you do that by whatever means, I think you increase your chances of establishing a collaboration. And once that is there, it's much easier for us to support you by helping us, basically by funding your research.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I mean, one thing that has struck me this afternoon is you've got a range of funding programs that can support those who are just beginning a collaboration, those who may be a bit further along in their joint research work, and then of course you've got funding through the Spirit program, which could be up to 18 million Thai baht. So that's substantial research funding. So opportunities, all the way along the spectrum. Stephanie, final words from you. I think you've received a lot of questions today, but any final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you so much for the organization. That was very agreeable. I hope we have been able to clear all the questions. My advice would be, if you have doubts and if you have gone through the documents and through the information on the internet website, don't hesitate to send us a message before you submit, because it's a pity if we then have to reject on a detail. So. Try to see whether the answer for your questions is there, and if you can't find it, let us know, and then we're happy to help.
Thanks, Stephanie. And as I said before, we'll be sending out copies of today's presentations to all of you that joined us today. And in those presentations, you've got the contact details of the presenters and details of the call details and so on, how you can access those. And then Isabel, last but not least, any comments from you as an alumnus or a veteran of one of these joint programs?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I think, yeah, just give it a try. I mean,
yeah,
there's not much you can do, I guess. And if you have a good partner, then and a good project, of course, then I think the chances are there.
Well, and what, as I said before, the fact that you said that this was the application, the reporting requirements, et cetera, were quite straightforward. So that's always good to hear in any of these international programs. And yeah, by all means, you have to try, otherwise you you won't know. I think with that, we can wrap up the session today. I would just like to thank today's presenters, to thank Stephanie and Matt and Patricia and Isabel for taking the time to be with us and to share this information. I found the presentations very clear, and they've obviously made themselves available to you, to today's participants, to follow up if you have specific questions. A final favor to ask of those who joined today: we will be putting up a survey in the kind of Q&A box, which we hope you could complete before you leave today's session. We do pay attention to these, and in terms of designing future events like this, and I would ask Matt, Stephanie, Patricia, and Isabel to also please complete the feedback form. So with that, I'd like to close the session, but thanks again to all the presenters, and thank you also to the participants. We hope you found it useful, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. So thanks very much. Good afternoon.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, everybody's quitting. Everybody's quitting. Oh dear. Everybody's gone.